They do not arrive with sirens or headlines. They do not stand behind podiums or pose for cameras. Most Americans will never hear their names, never know their units, never understand how close the fight came to home. Yet long before a shipment reaches a border, long before a badge makes an arrest or a courtroom renders a verdict, there are soldiers already moving. Quietly, deliberately, far from any fence or checkpoint. This is the story of U.S. Army Special Operations Forces in the counter-narcotics fight, not as legend or propaganda, but as work done in the margins, where policy fades, lines blur, and consequences do not wait for permission. The war on drugs did not begin with soldiers. It began with laws, speeches, and fear sharpened into policy. It grew from a domestic crisis into an international pressure campaign, from policing into geopolitics. By the late 20th century, narcotics trafficking had outgrown the institutions meant to contain it. Cartels operated like multinational corporations with private armies. Roots spanned oceans and continents. Corruption hollowed out police forces, courts, and entire governments. Violence was no longer episodic. It was systematic, and slowly, almost reluctantly, the United States military was drawn toward a mission it was never designed to own, but could no longer ignore. The early decision was deliberate restraint. Soldiers would not arrest. They would not prosecute. They would not publicly lead raids. The language mattered because the limits mattered. Foreign internal defense, security cooperation, intelligence support, stability operations. These were legal boundaries, political safeguards, and psychological distance from a fight that had already consumed countless lives. Special Operations Forces were chosen, not because they were more aggressive, but because they could operate inside ambiguity without collapsing under it. Green Berets were among the first set forward, deployed to jungles, deserts, and mountains under the premise of partnership. Train local units, improve small unit tactics, build logistics, communications, and leadership where those things had been broken or corrupted. Officially, the mission was capacity building. Unofficially, everyone understood the target. Cocaine labs hidden beneath triple canopy jungle. Methamphetamine sites concealed in industrial neighborhoods. Airstrips carved into farmland overnight. River corridors controlled by men whose loyalty shifted with the highest bidder. Soldiers learned quickly that this was not a clean fight, and it was not a finite one. Selection ensured that only a certain kind of person remained. Special operations training did not simply test strength or endurance. It tested judgment under isolation, restraint under pressure, and clarity when no option was clean. Candidates were evaluated on their ability to think, adapt, and endure ambiguity. They learned languages and cultures not as academic exercises, but as survival tools. They practiced diplomacy with one hand and violence with the other, knowing they might need either with little warning. Above all, they were taught that the most dangerous decision on any mission was not when to fight, but who to trust. Deployment replaced theory with consequence. Advisory teams lived alongside partner forces whose equipment was outdated, and whose loyalties could never be assumed. Some partners were committed professionals risking their lives against traffickers, who had already murdered their families. Others were compromised by intimidation, bribery, or simple exhaustion. Soldiers learned to read rooms, to watch hands and eyes, to listen for what was not said. They learned that trust was built slowly and could be shattered in a moment. Orders rarely mentioned drugs directly. They used phrases like transnational threats, regional stability, and counter-network operations. On the ground, the mission was unmistakable. Surveillance patrols tracking trafficker movement through mountain passes and river deltas. Intelligence cells correlating phone intercepts, financial transfers, aerial imagery, and human reporting. Advisory roles alongside units tasked to raid labs before dawn, knowing the targets might be empty by nightfall. Special operators were not there to pull the trigger, but they were often close enough to smell the chemicals, hear the gunfire, and feel the blast pressure when plans collapsed. Combat happened anyway, not declared, not acknowledged, Ambushes on dirt roads where the map still showed nothing. Convoys struck by improvised explosives meant for someone else. Helicopters taking fire while inserting partner forces into hostile territory. Advisors returning fire to keep their teams alive. Then documenting every round because justification mattered almost as much as survival. Once the shooting stopped, casualties occurred without ceremony. Incidents were wrapped in classification, buried in annexes, and summarized in language that drained the blood from the facts. Families received notifications that raised more questions than they answered. The explanation was always careful. Training accident, non-combat incident, operational mishap. The truth lives somewhere behind redacted pages and closed briefings. Grief had no audience. Mourning had no script. There were no parades, no national moments of silence. Just folded flags, quiet handshakes, and the understanding that this loss would never be fully acknowledged. Command pressure was constant and relentless. Produce measurable results without visible involvement. Reduce flow without escalating violence. Support partners without inheriting their corruption. Every success raised expectations. Every failure raised scrutiny. Metrics rarely matched reality. Seizure numbers looked clean on slides but meant little when routes shifted overnight. A dismantled lab meant nothing if 3 more opened downriver. Soldiers learned to operate between intent and outcome, knowing they would be judged by people who had never stood where they stood. The moral tension was unavoidable. Were these missions preventing harm or merely displacing it? Were they stabilizing regions or enabling governments that could not or would not reform? Did presence deter violence or simply push it out of sight? These questions were debated in offices and classrooms far from the field. On the ground, the calculus was simpler and heavier. Do nothing and watch communities collapse under cartel rule. Act forcefully and become another occupying force. Most days, the right answer lives somewhere no one would ever see. The brotherhood forged in that space was different, smaller, tighter. Built on shared silence and unspoken understanding. These were teams that trained together, deployed together, and carried each other's secrets. They learned who stayed calm when plans unraveled, who could be trusted when pressure mounted, who would shoulder blame when outcomes disappointed. Loss cut deeper because it was quieter. No public reckoning, no shared language for grief, just empty bunks, unfinished jokes, and the slow realization that someone would not be coming back. Technology changed, but the fundamentals did not. Drones replaced some patrols. Data analytics supplemented instinct. Communications improved, yet the mission remained rooted in human judgment, in relationships built face-to-face, in decisions made with incomplete information. The fight adapted because it had to. Routes shifted, cartels fragmented and reformed. Violence ebbed in one place only to surge in another. There was no victory parade waiting at the end of this road. Controversy followed these soldiers home, when it followed them at all. Critics questioned legality, effectiveness, morality. Supporters argued necessity and prevention. Most Americans never noticed either side. The work continued largely unseen, funded quietly, debated abstractly, and executed by people who understood that success in this mission often looked like nothing happening at all. Legacy is not built from speeches. It is built from nights spent listening to radios crackle in the dark, from decisions made when no option felt clean, from restraint when force would have been easier. These soldiers did not end the drug trade. They were never meant to. They slowed it. They disrupted it. They absorbed its violence so others would not have to see how close it came. History may never fully account for what was done in these shadows. Records will remain classified. Names will fade. But the absence of catastrophe, the disasters that never arrived, the communities never overrun, are part of that story too. Because between the chaos Americans fear and the comfort they assume, someone stood watch where no one was supposed to be and paid the price in silence.